Join me tonight on Twitch at 10 p.m. Eastern after the conclusion of the playoff game, where we'll talk about everything that happened this week in the NFL. And join me Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern to play some live NFL trivia for a chance to win cash prizes. Link in the description below. And now, on with our feature presentation. Making it to the conference championship and being one of the final four teams left is a special feeling. Even more special is being able to host the conference championship, and having a shot at going to the Super Bowl in front of your home fans. But perhaps the most special one of these scenarios is having the final game ever in your stadium be the conference championship. The last game ever held in the venue is for the right to go to the Super Bowl. It's only happened 3 times before in NFL history, with each having varying degrees of success. During the 2016 season, the final game ever held at the Georgia Dome was the NFC Championship, when the Atlanta Falcons defeated the Green Bay Packers to advance to Super Bowl 51. During the 2002 season, the final game ever held at Veterans Stadium was the NFC Championship, when the Philadelphia Eagles lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, missing out on a shot at Super Bowl 37. As a side note, to learn more about that Super Bowl, click the card in the upper right corner. But the first time this happened was on January 3rd, 1971, when the San Francisco 49ers were about to move into Candlestick Park. The 1970 season was the team's final season at Kezar Stadium, and they had the opportunity to host the Dallas Cowboys in the NFC Championship. Not only was this the first ever NFC Championship, and not only was this the first of what would be many playoff meetings between the two teams, but this was for the right to go to the Super Bowl, which would have been San Francisco's first appearance in the big game. And it was a disaster. Let's just say that this was quite the ugly send-off for the venue, with controversy in the stands at every turn, tons of people getting arrested and injured, and hundreds of officers needing to get involved. And this is the story behind the biggest disaster in the history of the NFC Championship. Before I talk about the incident in question, we need some context to understand the build-up to the game, why the Niners were hosting this game in the first place, and why the Niners were moving out of Kezar Stadium and into Candlestick Park. Entering the NFC Championship, you had 2 teams competing for the right to represent the NFC in Super Bowl V, both of whom were not only looking to make it to their first Super Bowl ever, but win their first world championship of any kind. In one corner, you had the Dallas Cowboys. They were the champions of the NFC East after finishing the season with a 10-4 record, and were one of the hottest teams in football, as after starting 5-4 and having their playoff hopes hanging on by a thread, they managed to win 5 straight to make the playoffs. I talked about the craziness of the Cowboys making the playoffs that year in a previous video of mine, and how their playoff fate was almost decided by a coin flip. So if you want to learn more about that, click the card in the upper right corner. Once the Cowboys, with their incredible defense that finished 4th in points allowed, got into the playoffs, that defense was put on display in the divisional round, when they defeated the Detroit Lions 5-0. Yes, you heard that right. The game ended 5-0. And now, the Cowboys were facing off against the team in the other corner. That team was the San Francisco 49ers, making it to the postseason for just the 3rd time in franchise history, and for the first time since 1957. Whereas the Cowboys got in on the strength of their defense, the 49ers got in on the strength of their offense. Led by MVP quarterback John Brody, the Niners went 10-3-1 and scored 352 points, which was the most in all of football. When you finish with the 2nd best record in the conference or the 3rd best record in the NFL, and you have a defense that ranked in the bottom half of the league in points allowed, that tells you everything about just how good this offense was. And after San Francisco entered the postseason red hot, having won their last 3 games, they defeated the Minnesota Vikings in the divisional round to win their first playoff game in NFL history, and their first playoff game of any kind since 1949, when they won in the first round of the AAFC playoffs against the New York Yankees. That was the good news for the Niners. The even better news was that they were hosting the NFC Championship. Now you might be saying that this was obvious. The Niners were 10-3-1, and the Cowboys were 10-4, so this shouldn't be a problem, right? However, remember that back in 1970, there was an incredibly stupid and ridiculous playoff system in place where all the sites were determined on a rotational basis. It didn't matter if you had a better record. There was still a chance that you could play on the road. I ranted about this horrible system in a previous video of mine, so if you want to learn more about how that worked and dive in depth into it, click the card in the upper right corner. However, this year, it worked out for the Niners, and this meant that the final game ever at their home venue, Kezar Stadium, would be the final step on the path to the Super Bowl. Sometimes when a team moves venues, it can be somewhat heartbreaking. Maybe you aren't ready to leave the venue behind, and maybe there's a ton of nostalgia and memories associated with that stadium that are going to be gone. Maybe you think that the venue still has life left in it, and think it just needs a little more love. However, I don't think anyone was shedding a tear over the Niners leaving Kezar Stadium after the 1970 season to move into Candlestick Park, because it seemed like not a single person, whether it was a fan or an on-field member such as a player or a coach, had anything nice to say about Kezar. It was that big of a problem. The stadium was built in 1924, way before the NFL was even on the radar, and way before professional sports were even on the radar. The Niners have been playing in that stadium since joining the AAFC in 1946, and it was time for an upgrade. I could go on and on about the problems with Kezar that made it almost unusable by NFL standards in 1970. Los Angeles Rams head coach George Allen said on the venue, "The field is the worst in the NFL. Unless the game was being played in perfect conditions, the field would devolve into a giant mud pit. Because of its location in the middle of the city, there was absolutely no parking. And that is not an exaggeration. You legitimately could not find parking at Kezar." Said one 49ers executive on the move away from Kezar, "We won't miss it." But for the purposes of our story, the biggest issue with Kezar, without a doubt, was its fan base, and how unsafe it was to go to a game there. Because of the stadium's close proximity to neighborhoods that, according to people, tended to attract, for lack of a better term, the hippie crowd, tons of fights broke out. Throwing bottles seemed to be a common theme. At one point after 1958, a fence had to be built in the stadium after a fan successfully landed a punch on Chicago Bears head coach George Halas. And now, the final game at Kezar was going to be a game where fan tensions would be at their absolute highest if the Niners lost, being so close to the Super Bowl and all. As long as the Niners can avoid losing here, then maybe, just maybe, the final game at Kezar can be incident-free and can be a fantastic send-off. That did not happen. We already knew going into the opening kickoff that the winner would be taking on the Baltimore Colts, who defeated the Oakland Raiders in the AFC Championship earlier in the day. To learn more about that game, click the card in the upper right corner. Now all that was left to determine was who their opponent would be. And early on, it was looking promising for San Francisco. After making some stops and preventing the Cowboys from crossing midfield, the Niners are able to get into the red zone following a perfect throw by Brody to his top target, Gene Washington. Even though the Niners are unable to get into the end zone and miss a golden opportunity when Brody misses on what should have been a surefire touchdown pass thanks to the pressure in his face, they are able to get 3 points out of it when Bruce Gossett hits a 16-yard field goal. The Niners are on the board first and have a 3-0 lead at the end of the first quarter. Unfortunately for the Niners, that one play to Washington was just about all they could muster up in the first half and early in the third quarter. The game was tied at 3 apiece at halftime, and to start the third quarter off, it seemed like Dallas was starting to find its rhythm and was starting to establish themselves. On San Francisco's second drive of the second half, John Brody threw a bad interception into the arms of Leroy Jordan, setting the Cowboys up with great field position. And on the first play of the ensuing drive, the Cowboys capitalized on it, with Wayne Thomas punching it in from 13 yards out to give Dallas their first lead of the game. Brody threw an interception on his next drive, with this one going to Mel Renfro, and the Cowboys once again capitalized on the mistake, driving down the field and eventually finding the end zone after Walt Garrison caught a 5-yard pass from Craig Morton to make it 17-3. As a side note, to learn more about Craig Morton's time with the Dallas Cowboys, click the card in the upper right corner. With the Cowboys up by 14, things were starting to look bleak, especially with how poor San Francisco's offense, which entered the playoffs as the #1 offense in all of football, was playing. And while the Niners did claw their way back to make it a one-possession game, following a 26-yard touchdown pass from John Brody to Dick Witcher, it was too little too late. San Francisco's last real chance of the game came midway through the fourth quarter, when in Dallas territory facing 4th and 5 with about 8 minutes left, they controversially decided to have Bruce Gossett try a long field goal. It missed, and that was about all she wrote. The final game that the Niners were ever playing at Kezar Stadium was going to end in defeat, and was going to end with the Dallas Cowboys advancing to their first Super Bowl in franchise history. And after the game, absolute disaster struck. Remember what I said earlier about the reputation that Kezar Stadium had, and how games tended to get extremely violent? Well, when you have a heartbreaking loss like this, combined with the fact that this was the last NFL game ever played at Kezar Stadium, and you have an already notoriously rowdy fan base, well, that is a recipe for disaster. After the game, chaos erupted when, according to the police officers, a group of hippie types upset and frustrated about the loss threw beer cans and bottles at spectators and at the players. While there's no television footage of this, as CBS had signed off by this point, you can see a bottle being thrown at the players as they were heading into the tunnel to go back into the locker rooms. It's not crystal clear, but thanks to NFL films capturing the moment, you can see a projectile being hurled onto the field. And from there, all bets were off. As one reporter said, in its quarter century serving as the home for the San Francisco 49ers, Kezar Stadium had often provided more action in the stands than on the field, with tipsy citizens tossing punches and bottles and cans. And never was that truer than in the aftermath of the NFC Championship. Initial reports said that 11 people were arrested for their role in the fighting and throwing, with most of those people being arrested for disturbing the peace. On January 5th, 2 days after the game, that number was reportedly double that, with 22 people being arrested. All of these incidents took place after the game in the East End Zone stands, and a lot more were involved in the action, because in total, over 100 police officers had to be brought into that stand. Imagine 100 officers all confined to one small section of the stadium. That's how bad it got. In fact, things got so bad that at least 10 people were sent to the hospital after the game, although fortunately, most of them got released shortly after. And to make matters worse, the day after the game, all of the talk in the city wasn't about the game, but rather was about the horrific display in the stands, and what drastic measures could be taken to ensure something like this never happens again. You know it's always a good sign when on January 4th, the day after the game and the first government workday of the new year, the first order of business on the city of San Francisco's agenda was how to deal with Kezar Stadium and its fans, even though that was the last time the Niners were ever going to play there. Loris DeGrazia, the president of the Recreation and Park Commission, said that control over behavior in the stands is an absolute necessity, and went as far as saying that the city can't afford to have people's lives endangered as they were during the NFC Championship. The mayor of the city said that this was evident as well, and Supervisor Peter Tamaris not only called the brawls that took place afterward a terrible disgrace, but insisted that alcohol sales be banned at the stadium. And Tamaris was not the only one who felt that way. Multiple city officials voiced their concerns as well, echoing the thoughts of Tamaris that there should not be alcohol sold at Kezar Stadium. Now, even if you might think this idea is crazy, it eventually passed. For years afterwards, because of the stadium's location near the center of the city, and because of the incidents from this game, alcohol was banned at Kezar Stadium. It was not until the San Francisco Deltas, a short-lived disaster of a soccer team that only lasted one season, came to the stadium in 2017 that alcohol was allowed to be served again, and that was to only a select group of people with VIP tickets and packages. The incident left that much of a black mark for a long period of time. Sometimes, the final game of the stadium can be a joyous and memorable occasion. New England Patriots fans will tell you that as bad as Foxborough Stadium was, having the final game there be the Tuck Rule game was a heck of a send-off. New York Jets fans will never forget the final game at Giants Stadium being a dominant Week 17 victory over the Cincinnati Bengals on Sunday Night Football in front of a national television audience to get into the postseason against all odds. And sometimes, the final game can be a disaster that everyone wants to forget. And safe to say, that was definitely the case here. Because while some people leave their heart in San Francisco, 49er officials wanted to leave their horrible, dangerous past behind there too. Get your official Jaguar Gamer 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9, and subscribe to 60-second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.